Let's discover William Wordsworth, one of the most important romantic poets in the world, all around the world. Something about his life. He was born in Cumberland in the English Lake District in 1770. In 1791, he got a BA degree at St. John's College, Cambridge. In 1791, he traveled to revolutionary France and was fascinated by the Republican movement. Well, actually, he was a supporter of the French Revolution. In 1792, he had a daughter, Caroline, from a French aristocratic woman, Annette Vallon. But the reign of terror led him to become estranged to the Republic, and the war between England and France caused him to return to England. He also rejected some of his opinion he had before the French Revolution. In 1795, he moved to Dorset with his sister Dorothy, who was his most faithful friend. In 1795, he made friends with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, with whom he collaborated in the 1797-1799 period to write lyrical ballads, which is considered the manifesto of the Romantic poetry. In 1799, William and Dorothy moved to the Lake District, and then he married Mary Hutchinson, and they had together 5 children, but he was quite an absent father, unfortunately. In 1843, he became the poet laureate, and he died in 1850. His main works, well, of course, the collection in the lyrical ballads. There are 2 editions of the lyrical ballads. The first was published in 1798 and the second in 1800. This edition contains the famous preface, so the manifesto of English Romanticism, where the 2 poets, Wordsworth and Coleridge, explain their task, the aim of the poetry, the topics, the language, etc., etc. Then he wrote poems in 2 volumes, the Prelude, the Excursion. The object of poetry, according to Wordsworth, from the preface to the lyrical ballads, is something very simple, something very common. I'm going to read it. The principal object was to choose incidents and situations from common life and to make these incidents and situations interesting by tracing in them the primary laws of our nature. So he wanted to go back to simple life, common life, and to awake the reader to feel the connection with nature. Again, this is the language stated by Wordsworth in the preface. The language of these men, low and rustic people, is adopted because such men hourly communicated with the best objects from which the best part of language is originally derived, and because, being less under the influence of social vanity, they convey their feelings and notions in simple and unelaborated expressions. This is, of course, a reaction against the artificiality and diction of the Augustan age. Who is the poet, according to William Wordsworth? What is a poet? He is a man speaking to man, a man endued with more lively sensibility, who has a greater knowledge of human nature and a more comprehensive soul than are supposed to be common among mankind. So he is gifted with more sensitivity. He shares the sorrow and the happiness of common man. What is poetry? Poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origins from emotion recollected in tranquility. So the emotion is contemplated till, by a species of reaction, the tranquility gradually disappears, and an emotion kindred to that which was before the subject of contemplation is gradually produced, and does itself actually exist in the mind. What does it mean? Well, this is very well explained and can be really understood in the very famous poem about daffodils. So I wander lonely as a cloud. Why, when the poet is having a walk in the Lake District, and he suddenly sees this group of daffodils, a sea of daffodils, waving and tossing, yes, like the waves of a sea. And he is overwhelmed by a strong emotions of happiness. And the poet, Wordsworth, want to transmit this strong emotion to the common people, because he thinks that common people are so busy with their life, with a stressful life, that they have forgot the connection with nature. So he goes back home, sits down and writes the poem, because he wants to recollect that strong emotion, but in tranquility, in order to be more able to transmit that emotion, that feeling, that happiness to the reader. Poetic composition, according again to William Wordsworth, is this. So in this mood, successful composition generally begins, and in a mood similar to this, it is carried on. But the emotion from various causes is qualified by various pleasures, so that in describing any passions whatsoever, which are voluntarily described, the mind will upon the whole be in a state of enjoyment. So when you read a poem, you should feel the same feelings as the poet felt and lived in a particular situation, in a state of enjoyment. And this is the poetic process. So the poet observes an object, for example, the daffodils, and he's got a sensory experience, he's got a strong emotion. The strong emotion is then recollected in tranquility. So he goes home, he sits down at his desk, and he recollects the strong emotion, remember it, but in tranquility. So the emotion is kindred, is not strong and overwhelming. From that kindred emotion, the poet creates, because he's gifted with imagination. He creates a poem, and the poem carries a message to the reader, and the reader can share the same feeling, can share the same experience, and imagine that group of daffodils dancing and tossing in the landscape. And so he can feel that emotion of happiness surrounded by nature. So according to Wordsworth, the man and nature are inseparable. He's got a strong pantheistic view of nature. So nature is the seat of the spirit of the universe. He did not believe in a God. He believed in a sort of God expressing himself in nature. So nature comforts man in sorrow, It is a source of joy, a source of pleasure. It teaches man to love, to act in a moral way. And this is something I think we can understand, because a walk in the wood, a walk in the country can really make us feel better. Now the senses and the memory. So Wordsworth exploited the sensibility of the eye and ear to perceive the beauty of nature. So this means that he wrote many poems describing scenes taken from nature. He believed that the moral character develops during childhood, and actually the child is a figure extremely important in his poems and for himself. He was influenced by the theory of David Hartley. So the sensation caused by physical experience lead to simple thoughts. These simple thoughts later combine into complex and organized ideas, which are, of course, of the poet. And memory is a major force in the process of growth. This is an image describing Tintin Abbey, which is another very famous poem by Wordsworth. So the poet's task, according to Wordsworth, is a teacher. So he shows men how to understand their feelings and improve their moral being, and he draws attention to the ordinary things of life where the deepest emotions are to be found. For example, flowers, for example, a rainbow. The style is the real revolution brought over by Wordsworth and Coleridge. So he abandoned the 18th century poetic diction. He almost always used blank verse, this means no rhyme, and he proved skillful at verse forms such as sonnets, odes, ballads, and lyrics. So William Wordsworth was a real revolutionary man, revolutionary poet, because he changed the rules of poetry, which were too far from people, which were too far from being understood, from being felt by the reader. And along with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, he wrote this revolutionary message, the preface to the lyrical ballads, which changed the state of poetry, and which really hoped that poetry could be a sort of medicine, a sort of healing message to the people.